Oh my goodness, look! Gamo's live on Facebook! So, the last video that I did here was really interesting because midway through the video, and especially towards the end of the video, everybody, you and me, figured out that when I lifted my right hand, you guys saw me lifting my left hand because the entire picture was reversed. And so I'm trying it with a different setting on the camera today. But unfortunately, what that means is that I cannot see if I'm in the picture or out of the picture. It could be that you're only seeing half my face and I can't see it. So I thought what I would do is see if I could find myself on Facebook Live and I could actually see what you guys might comment or things like that by keeping track on my own phone, because I'm just talking to a camera. It's just dumb. There's nothing there. So, good. I got my sound off. That's good. Hi, everybody. Wow, 8 comments already? We've got, all kinds of, David Redding too? What time is it in England? You're on Facebook all day because they won't let you get out of your house. That's what it is. Oh yeah, boy, all kinds of good people here. Louisiana, Mississippi, Anthony, Texas, another one in Texas, Oregon, Missouri, Michigan. Woo, fun stuff. Okay, so I have a, well, let me make sure I'm in the camera in the right place. I have kind of a fun thing to talk about today. And I've been doing support on quilting machines for a long, long time. And one of the things that always comes up sooner or later, and I always try to cover it actually during the delivery of the machine, when we deliver, set up, and do that little beginning training to get people started with their machine. If it's a computerized machine as opposed to guided by hand, I always would take people through the instructions step by step, and one of the things in the instructions on computerized quilting is before you load your quilt, you write down the length of the quilt and the width of the quilt, and you write down any specifications as to the border sizes, because all these measurements are a lot easier to get before you put it on the frame, especially the quilt length. And in the instructions, there's a little line there. I'm thinking particularly of the Creative Studio Statler owner's manual, and it talks about reducing the dimensions by 1% to 5% depending on type of batting and the density of the quilting. And a really common phone call to a Gamo dealer or a technician or to tech support is people calling and saying that my quilting looks fine when I start a row of stitching, but by the time I get to the other end, it always stitches past the boundary that I had set for it. And this is almost never a mechanical issue. And I won't say that it's never, because we do have certain types of things that can go wrong where the machine loses track of where it is on the table. It's a problem with wiring or with a motor or various things that can happen, usually on older machines. And we try to nip those in the bud before they ever actually cause you trouble. But what I'm talking about is the quilt shrinkage that happens every single time you quilt something. And I'm going to look and see if I've had any questions yet. We got Wisconsin. Hey, Mom. My mother-in-law is here. So for years, maybe 8 or 9 years, I have been telling people, oh, well, it's probably an issue with shrinkage. And I hear back from them, No, it's not an issue with shrinkage, it's something else. And I thought I would give you a physical, tangible, hands-on example of how shrinkage works in real life. And this would help you to understand a little bit more what you're seeing. And I've got a visual aid, it's right off camera. I'll be right back. All right. So this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. For you international folks, that's a little bit bigger than an A4. This is the same sheet of paper. Well, okay, it's not the same one. It's an identical sheet of paper that has been folded. And the reason that I folded it was to illustrate what happens when you use lines of stitching. I'm just going to trust the camera here. What happens when you use lines of stitching on your quilt? Your original fabric was this long. And when you quilt it, it shrinks up with every line of stitching. Now you will notice that my overall width has not changed because I didn't fold it in that direction. I folded it in this direction. You see that? Probably off camera. So this right here is the shrinkage that I'm talking about. So I've shown it to you with a sheet of paper. Every one of these creases on this accordion paper represents a line of stitching going this way. I don't have any lines of stitching going the other way, and that's why it's only shrunk up in the one direction. Let me do the same thing with some fabric now. So I'm going to grab this. Okay. So now I can see the same thing as you guys. So, helps if I don't put my hand over the camera. So I stitched, all right, I'm going to hold it slow here. So I stitched an 8.5 by 11 rectangle on this batting. And then I carefully, as well as I could, cut an 8.5 by 11 piece of fabric, which would very nicely line up with the lines that I had sewed. And so all the way around, this fabric is sitting right on that line. Okay, here and here, you see the line? And here. And if anything, it's going over the line just a little bit. Come on now. And there. Okay. So, that's what we're starting with. I apologize. I have to start this up again. And I'm going to see if I can do it without throwing this camera across the room. Let's see. It's going to restart right in that corner. All right, I'm going to have to set this down. There's no two ways about it. Hang on. Okay. So I'm sorry I couldn't hold the threads and get the machine started and everything while holding the camera. But what's happening now is I've got it stitching this zigzag pattern. Much like the crinkled paper. And I'll show you on the Statler what. So here's the pattern that I drew. It's basically just that 8.5 by 11 rectangle, and then I did zigzags back and forth so that it would shrink the fabric just one direction. And if we go look over here, we can already see the shrinkage. I'm on the right hand side now. We can already see how it's pulling that fabric in. And we started with the fabric over that line. And it's not shrinking in the direction that the stitching runs, it's shrinking the other way. Now, a normal pattern that goes in all different directions is going to shrink roughly equally in every way. And so it doesn't really matter, your shrinkage is going to be fairly even. But some of the issues that control how much it shrinks is your clamps on the side of the table. Okay, these Velcro clamps, I've seen people's machine before where this Velcro had been replaced by like a bungee cord or a piece of elastic, and I will tell you what, it did not, there's no way for a piece of elastic to hold the quilt and keep it from shrinking up. You need to have something that's non-stretchy. And so that's one thing, is if you're having really bad shrinkage issues, you might make sure that the quilt is being stabilized well. Now, intentionally on this, I did not stabilize this piece of fabric. I just set it on top. And if you look here, now this is how you feel when you get to the right-hand side of your quilt, and now the pattern has run off of the middle of the quilt and it's stitching into the border. And you say to yourself, what's wrong with my machine? Or what did I do wrong? Because now it's stitching this pattern right into my border. But if you look at it, it stitched exactly where it was supposed to. It ended right at the corner, right where it's supposed to be. All the stitching is perfect, but what happens is it rippled up that fabric as it stitched it, and we've got over an inch here. We've got over an inch where it shrunk that fabric. And so this is an extreme example, and I crafted this example on purpose to shrink as quickly as possible by having all the stitching running in the same direction. And you'll notice that it did not shrink at all this other direction. If you look here, it's not pulled in on this side, and it's not pulled in here. It was perfect all the way down. It looked just fine. But, and this left side, where it started right here, and I was a little bit off, you know, the left side looked fine because it hadn't had a chance to shrink yet. But by the time it got to the right, it had pulled up the quilt top, and just like this piece of paper, where it is shorter because it's been crinkled. It's, if I line up one end, and it's shorter because it's been crinkled. So this is the best example I could think of to help everybody to understand what goes on with that. Let me flip the camera, and I'll see if there's any questions I can take. Uh-oh, where'd the flip button? Oh, it moved on me. Sorry, guys. Oh, wrong flip. Flip back. Okay. So some of you know me from the other videos that I've done, and so you're of course very aware that editing is the only thing that makes me appear like I've got my act together. I cut out the stuff that that makes me look like I'm just winging it. All right. So let's see what comments we got here. Ooh. The video is keeping up, but the comments are not. Oh, hi, Bonnie. Glad you could join us. I work with her. The comments are not keeping up. Let me go back out because I know there's comments. There's always comments. I'm going to exit Facebook and come back in, guys. Check my email. Yeah, that's all good. Quilting is live now. Oh, hi, Naomi. Okay. Yeah, Bethany nailed it. Look at how much shrinkage is happening. So, Patricia asked if I would get the same shrinkage if the fabric was basted down on the right-hand side. So that's a good question. This example that I did right here, I've actually got a quilt sandwich and then another batting on top and then top fabric. So I actually have backing, batting, top, batting, top. So that is obviously unusual. But if you based all of the quilt in advance, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of award-winning quilters that you take classes from on a regular basis. There are the quilters whose quilts are featured on the covers of magazines, and many of them pre-based the entire quilt before they even start. Now, I want to point out that this is not a quilter who completes 2 or 3 quilts in a day. This is a quilter who spends a lot of time on one quilt. And, oh, I got a message here. Marla Clark, your question is, if I had a 48-inch square wall hanging with a 4-inch border and I want an edge to edge on the inside of the border, do I click the boundary of the edge to edge slightly inside the actual edge? The answer is yes. So where the pattern's going to start, click that right on the money. But where it's going to end, I would, 48 inches is pretty good size. I would probably go about a 1/2 inch inside, depending on the density and the type of batting. So a lot of the award-winning quilters will go through the entire quilt start to finish, and they'll actually pre-base every 4 to 8 inches. They'll base their horizontals, they'll base their verticals, and they will lock everything down to a true orientation where the seams on the quilt top are running absolutely vertical and absolutely horizontal by using the channel lock on their machine to get absolute true 90-degree angles on everything. And by doing this, it allows you to keep any puffy areas of the quilt locked into the actual area where that looseness in the quilt top is, so that you can quilt out the fullness. So, and that kind of ties into something else. How is it that you quilt out the fullness of a quilt top? Well, since the quilting process shrinks your quilt top, it does a great job of eliminating unwanted fullness on a quilt top. The problem is, when you don't have unwanted fullness, it still shrinks the quilt top. So it's a really interesting thing to try to keep up with. Got another question. Thank you, Jen, for texting them to me. I got to get that other kind of glasses, bifocals, because I'm over 40 now. This question is, what's the best method for combating shrinkage? Well, I will say the number one thing is awareness. If you're unaware of shrinkage, then you're a victim of it. So the very first thing is to always, always, always be aware of shrinkage. If you're doing something where precision is important, and I'm thinking of custom quilting where you might place patterns where the corners of the triangles are supposed to perfectly hit the corners of the quilt blocks. If you're doing precision quilting, don't quilt any larger an area at a time than you're comfortable doing. So let's say we've got a quilt that's 8 blocks wide, okay? I might do 2 blocks of patterns, custom place, not edge to edge, but custom. I might do 2 blocks and evaluate my shrinkage. And if my estimation on shrinkage was about right, then I might do 3 or 4 blocks in the next chunk and then finish up the row with the last chunk. But if I do 2 blocks and there's too much shrinkage in that 2 blocks for me to estimate, I might do the rest of it 1 block at a time. The awareness of shrinkage is really the key. You can stabilize the quilt to a certain degree by the side clamps like I showed earlier, and by basting. But here's the thing. There is no way on earth to stitch a quilt and not have it shrink, because you're stitching the quilt top to the backing through the batting, and it's a physical impossibility. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter how hard I stretch this piece of paper, it's pretty hard to get it to the original length, and as soon as I release it, it pops back. And so I don't want to stretch the snot out of my quilt on the frame, because what will happen is as soon as it comes off the frame, what's it going to do? Like that. It's like stretching a piece of elastic when you stitch it onto the fabric. That's a great technique if you want to have a cuff that's tight, right? You stretch the elastic as you stitch it, and that way when you release the pressure from it, it shrinks in. Well, don't do that to your quilt top. One of the things that I love to repeat is that if you torture fabric, it will later get revenge on you. Just like torturing a dog or torturing a person, they will want to seek revenge. You never know what Andrew's going to say. But fabric's the same way. It has a memory. And if you torture it, it's going to get back at you. Okay. Another question. Hang on. Would you get the same... I think I got all of those questions. I am not entirely sure, though. Hang on. Yep. Okay. So thank you guys for joining us for this. I am going to keep an eye on the messages here in the next hour or so, and I'll try to answer other questions that I get. But I hope this is going to be something that really helps you to bring your level of quilting up to the next level so that you can put out the very best work that you can be proud of. Oh, I've got another message. Hang on. Denser patterns lead to more shrinkage. That is correct. So every line of stitching, think of these lines on the paper. Every line of stitching shrinks in the direct, it shrinks perpendicular to the line of stitching. So if the stitching is running this way, it shrinks the paper this way. And the reason this paper is not shorter in the other direction is because there aren't any creases in the other direction. So an ideal pattern has lots of curves and lots of beautiful shapes and everything, and the average stitching density is similar throughout the pattern, and there's as many lines going this way as there are lines going this way. But if you take a pattern and stretch it out so that there's a lot of space between those lines of stitching, you will see much less shrinkage than if you compress the pattern and it's very dense and it takes a really long time to stitch, but also it's going to shrink it up a lot more. I purchased a quilt. It was at a charity auction, and it was in the silent auction. And I ended up going against this one other lady for it. Super beautiful quilt. I love this quilt, but the first quilt that a lady had done after she took training classes on Creative Studio, and she had practiced all of the different things that had been taught in the class, and I loved the quilt. And I talked to her after I got the quilt, and I said, you know, I'm thrilled to have this, and I don't know why you put it in the auction, and I got it for a great price. And we were talking about it, and she said, well, what happened was one of her friends had looked at it and said, oh gosh, that's gorgeous, it's beautiful, all that stuff. It's too bad the consistency of the stitch density wasn't better. And what her friend was saying there is that there were some areas that were more heavily quilted and other areas that were very lightly quilted on the same quilt. And it actually did cause quite a bit of variation in how the quilt laid, and she had struggled quite a bit with pattern shrinkage while she did it. Now, the quilt was still stunning, and I'm still thrilled to have it, but that was kind of a rookie mistake. But it's also instructive because that comment that her friend made was so, I mean, it was right on the money. Her friend was exactly right. But as soon as she said that, every time now that the maker of the quilt looked at it, all she could see was that one thing that wasn't quite right, and that's why she threw it in the charity auction. So I thought that was interesting. It's an illustration of how you really have to watch what you say, because, you know, it's an accurate comment, and it was instructive, and she never made the same mistake again. But also, it's sad, actually, that she ended up putting the quilt in an auction because she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. If you have a quilt top that's a bit fuller, should you use a more dense pattern to eat up that fullness? I would say no. What I would do is I would look into, on Gamble.com, there's a blog article for sure, written by Karen Marchetti, and there may be a video that goes with it, I don't know. And maybe somebody from Gamble can post it in the comments. But there's a blog article on basting your quilt square. And it has photographs and illustration. And I'll tell you, that article from a couple years ago really has helped a lot of people. I will say though, and maybe it's just me because I'm a hands-on learner, I struggled to really get it by reading the article. And I read it and I read it and I tried to get it. I wanted to understand it, but I'm a tactile learner, hands-on. And so what really did it for me was I took a normal quilt, nothing special, and I practiced that technique. I actually did it. And by the time I did that one quilt, which didn't have any real problems, at that point I understood what the article was talking about, because sometimes you just have to do it before you understand it. A lot of things in life are that way. Any more messages? I've got one more. Nope, same old ones. Well, anyway, thanks so much for meeting us here for the Facebook Live. There will be another one, I believe, at 10:30 a.m. Central tomorrow. And I would tell you what it was going to be, except I didn't check the list to find out. So it'll be a surprise to you and to me both. Have a wonderful Sunday. I hope you are doing things you love. Probably quilting. We'll see you next time.